Hello and thank you for tuning into Stampscaping 101. This is a really quick scene. It's a simple two-stamp scene using my prickly branch stamp, stamped several times, and just going for a background element in terms of the birds and creating a focal point. But the main point about this scene here is creating depth just using one image basically in repetition. And to create that depth, you can go with any kind of color scheme. In this one right here, I went with, kind of the brown warm tones. The warm tones were just achieved with the use of my mustard seed distress ink, okay? And then a series of brown tones laid over the top of it, but leaving the center area kind of center lit. And then if you watch this scene come together, you'll see where I just kind of streaked in some additional tones and kind of created this vignette on the outside. That whole thing takes about maybe 10 minutes or so. I mean, in this video, it's probably about a 20-minute scene, but then I'm kind of explaining things along the way. It takes a little bit longer, but these scenes are really fun to do in terms of, creating a full kind of visual statement in terms of depth and color and saturation and all that type of stuff that, I usually try to go for in kind of more complex compositions. But sometimes it's just kind of fun to just take one stamp or two stamps or something like that and to create a lot of different, layers in terms of visual depth through the use of value. And I have some other lessons on that as well, but this is just one where I've used just one stamp. And some ways that you can kind of embellish something like this if you want to take it, one step further is just with the use of things like your gel pens and whatnot. If you have like colored gel pens, this scene right here, you've seen me use a lot of the white gel pen a lot of times to create texture and highlights and whatnot. But in this scene, because it's yellow, a yellow color scheme, I've used a yellow pen to create these little highlights on some of these branches, and I feel that that creates additional depth in the scene and also reiterates lighting direction, okay? And one of the things I explain in the video is the branches on the left side of the scene. For the most part, you can see those little highlights on the right side of the branches, and the branches on the left side of the scene. I've tried to put most of the highlights on the left side of the branch. Did I say that right? The branches on the right side have the left side highlights. And the branches underneath the light just on the highlights are on the top surface of the branches. Kind of, I mean, these branches are really thin, but it's just one of those little subtle things that you can kind of do to, as a nice addition to, a simple scene like this, or, I guess it is a scene, but, I don't know, scenic statement, we'll call it. Anyways, if you choose to watch this video, I hope you enjoy it. This can certainly be a nice stamp along if you want to stamp along with something like this. You don't have to use those same images. If you use pine trees or something like that, you just stamp out the pine trees in a dark brown, change the height, maybe change the angle slightly, on these branches right here. I stamp it up here, then the next one I might kind of do it off center a little bit. You can also change your angles slightly. Even if it's a pine tree, you can kind of tilt it down a little bit, so it's not so redundant from one image to the next. And I mean, this is the same stamp stamped several times, but it's not so apparent, when I look at it, like, oh my god, there's the same stamp used all, several different times, nature, if you just kind of change the configuration of it slightly, it's not going to look awkward, Alright, so anyways, hope you enjoyed the scene, and it's a lot of fun to do. Try this different type of thing, you know, this background in different color schemes. Just, you know, grab whatever pads you have, you know, whatever brands, you know, and just lay out some different color schemes and just approach it, you know, from that direction. Here's a couple different blues, you know, if you have something like this, you know, light blue, medium, darker blues, you know, you can create this whole type of thing going, and just stamp out your imagery in some colors out of your color scheme that you did the background with, and it'll look like, you know, you'll create deep space through the use of value. Okay, so anyways, hope you enjoy it, and if it's a stamp along for you, hope you have fun stamping it out. Okay, we're going to do a quick scene here, and it will be a 2-stamp scene. Okay, we're going to do something really simple in terms of the composition, but hopefully and the end result will look nice and rich in terms of the color saturations and the depth within the scene, just using the structure of this one stamp called Prickly Branches. Okay, we're going to go with a warm tone scene, and I'm going to try some color schemes, color combinations that I don't remember using before, but I just grabbed them. The mustard seed, maybe a couple of the distress saints. I'm not quite sure which exact ones I'll use, but I don't think I've used this rich cocoa memento lately. So we're going to try something like that. But basically what this is, it's some light tones and hopefully some medium tones and darker tones. I'm not sure how dark this rich cocoa gets, but we might go a little bit darker than that if need be. But first I'm going to start off with the mustard seed, okay? Now basically what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to achieve this glow. And it's just going to be a real simple center glow, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply some of this mustard seed ink. And I'm going to go for full coverage, okay? Now when you're using some of these thicker styles of ink on glossy cardstock, you can see how much that kind of puddles up, right? And I can just drag it across, okay? And that makes this application process really easy, and you also get a nice amount of coverage in terms of the amount of ink used, okay? Now if you're using some types of other papers where you can't really do this, you know, without it soaking in and leaving these big kind of oval shapes, then your paper probably isn't quite as sealed off as this cardstock. It would be if you're using something like a, you know, an inkjet printer paper or something like that, okay? So, but generally, a clay-coated glossy cardstock will allow you to do that with kind of the more thick styles of ink, which would be things like any inks from Ranger, I find, as far as the dye-based inks from Ranger. Okay? Alright. It's a good amount of coverage. It's not just coverage, but I really soak this paper pretty good. Okay, now it's not super wet to the touch because the ink has, you know, penetrated the surface and it's kind of drying a little bit. It's dry to the surface because it's, you know, it's kind of, it's absorbed, I guess you can say. Okay, now let's try this walnut stain. I might want to go with an intermediate color as well, but we'll see how this goes. Yeah, that's just what I figured. Okay, this walnut stain can be fairly dark, but you can see how dark it is on here. It's because the amount of ink that was used with that mustard seed was full, very full in terms of the coverage, okay? So what you have is kind of, you're applying somewhat wet on top of damp, okay? And when that happens, the ink that you have on this isn't being grabbed off of the applicator as fast because you're kind of going on a damp surface. Not damp in terms of, super wet or anything like that, but it's just, the amount of ink that has already been absorbed into the paper is not super saturated, but fairly saturated. It just depends on your paper and how much ink you use, how wet your pads are, so you just kind of have to get a feel for it. But that this ink isn't being absorbed too quickly is not a bad thing. That it takes you a little bit longer to achieve, a darker tone, because when that happens, you kind of have a lot more control over it, okay? Now what I'm doing here is I'm also applying I'm making this a little bit streaky, okay? Like that. And in the end result, I think that'll be a good thing. It'll give the scene a little bit of atmosphere, okay? I don't usually like things completely symmetrical, in terms of like a round, glowing area. Although that wouldn't be bad or anything like that. I just like, it's a personal preference. I like it a little bit, I don't know, kind of irregular, streaky. I think it looks like, I don't know, like moisture in the air or something like that, with the area of light that remains. Okay, so after the walnut stain, let's try this cocoa, okay? Now, Memento inks are really thick as well, so we'll see how dark it can get with this one. Now, here's one of the reasons why I like using Marvy inks, especially for these videos, just to expedite the process. See, this is the color of the ink just on a dry piece of paper. You can see how dark it is, but see, even if I put that amount on here and I kind of wipe it across, what happens is I'm kind of wiping off the ink as much as I'm applying it to the paper. When you're using really thick inks, I love thick inks for the like the first one or two colors, but sometimes using something like a Marvy ink, it's just, it can be a little bit easier to apply in terms of the the speed at which you can tone a scene. Now, I mean, I can go like this too. I'm just kind of tapping it around like that, and that builds up a little bit of the ink as well, as opposed to being absorbed, okay? So that's another kind of touch you can do. If you kind of go, with the same application method or technique with every color, you might not achieve kind of the same results, okay? Like, for example, the first one I just kind of swiped it everywhere. And the second one I did the same, but if you kind of swipe with the same pressure, like on this one, being that the page is a little bit wet, like I said, you'll end up kind of dragging off some of the ink. So let's take a look at this right here. See this right here? I mean, I've applied that, and it's been a few seconds, right? But if I go like that, well, that's laid down pretty good. I thought I was going to be wiping off some ink. It's getting a little bit lighter, but I don't know. It's absorbing a little bit too. Okay, I thought it was still hovering on that surface a little bit, but that was good. Okay, so we can dab and try to build up that color a little bit more. But let's take this, this cocoa right here. That's the color of it right there, right? But let's see if we can contrast that with like a Marvy dark brown color, okay? Zoom out a little bit here. Here's the dark brown, okay? It's about as dark brown as that Memento, right? But let's see what it looks like on this card, okay? See, I can wipe it on like that, and it is somewhat penetrating the surface and making it darker, okay? And this is yet another layer of tones, so you can see just how much faster you can kind of achieve a darker tone, alright? But if you don't have that, let the card set up a little bit and just add more of your memento or distress inks or something like that. Okay, going for the corners. These types of cards can be really fun. They're kind of atmospheric and as far as what I'm going to do with it, I'll stamp these images out in some different tones to give it some depth through the use of value. And you're going to, what we'll do is we'll stamp it out using the same colors that we've applied to the background, okay? Alright, that was the brown, dark brown. Let's try a Marvy black, okay? And let's hit the four corners. The darker you go, the less into the scene you take it, okay? So that we get this transition going from lights to darks. And that's because the darker tones don't go into the scene quite as far as the lighter ones, okay? Now, if you're putting a streak in there, yeah, it'll go, towards the middle, but just in general, your darker tones kind of stay around on the perimeter. In this case, the dark brown and the black. You can do this in any color scheme too. Just pick out some colors that will transition nicely with whatever color scheme you're working with. Start off with your lighter tones and then work incrementally and progressively into your darker tones. Okay, tapping, building up a little bit of tone, running the edges. But yeah, these look good in greens, purples, whatever. I don't know, go with your favorite color scheme or your favorite color and then build a whole color scheme around it. It's really fun. Or sometimes you can do the same card, like say do it 3 different times but in 3 different color schemes, and you can kind of create this triptych, where you display the 3 cards or scenes together. They can represent different times of day, different seasons. I'm using this prickly branches stamp, but any kind of tree or foliage would be good. Okay, that looks about right. See that? See what a glow that is? And that's one of the benefits of using dye-based inks, okay? A lot of times when, this is what people see too, and it's understandable. In most forms of stamping, what you get is side-by-side coloring. There's a lot of imagery, and then you stamp it out, and then you color in those images. A lot of times it's, they're outline stamps or something like that sort. But in this one right here, a lot of times people think, you've colored yellow right here, okay? And there might be some kind of brown, a band of it right here, and then you've just colored black on the outside. But the thing about something like this is the thing that creates that rich, deep glow right out here is that we know that the yellow was applied underneath the whole thing, and then the brown was applied over the yellow, and then the darker brown applied over the brown and yellow, and then, you know, the darkest areas are out here. Because, I mean, if you can, here's a, you know, like a black over here, okay? And there's the brown. You can kind of see the difference between the two. That's the brown over the yellow, but that's just the straight brown. So if we just only did brown right here, it would be that kind of, you know, just straightforward brown. It wouldn't be quite as rich. Okay, let's get to the stamping of the imagery here. And we'll try to create some depth. Now, what I'm going to do to create depth is you just kind of stick with the same color scheme that you've just done, okay? So, a really light impression, or a lighter impression of these branches could be done with something like a memento, maybe, like this one. Now, I wouldn't stamp it in yellow because it's not going to show up at all down here, so you have to go with, you know, one of your kind of mid-range tones. And this one looks like a dark one, but I'm just going to see what it's going to look like. I have a feeling I'll use the rich cocoa brown, which is the second color that we used. Now, this is normally a lot darker, but, you know, when it was stamped over yellow, it didn't appear quite as dark. Now, that's because I swiped it, okay? This is going to appear darker as an impression than streaking it across, because, like I said, I was kind of wiping off a lot of the brown that was applied, or that was on the tip in that application. Let's see how it looks. Okay. This is a large stamp, but there's not a great deal of surface area. You hear me, you know, if you've watched other videos say surface area. Well, this one is a large stamp, but, you know, the imagery is real thin, so you don't have to apply quite as much pressure, but still get good pressure in terms of your coverage of that pressure used. And plus the paper is a little bit damp, so you want to allow the ink to transfer off the image onto the card. Okay. Okay. That's about right. See that right there? Okay. Let me go for another one out here. Maybe I'll change the angle slightly. Alright, so we have it in that brown. Boy, that looks good just as is, but I did say that I was going to do it to create depth, so I'm also going to do it in black now. Alright? Now, I'm not going to stamp it directly over, you know, my other one, so I'm going to go a little bit lower, and hopefully this represents something closer to us. Usually if you go higher up in the horizon, just in general, not all the time, but objects are usually farther back. So I'm going to try to go a little bit off-center, and I'll change the angle a bit. I say something like this. Alright, no right and wrong. There's just preference. Okay, this one's getting dark, and I want this one to be really dark, so I always say this, I need to start doing it though, but this would be kind of interesting to do this when your foreground images in something like a, like a black detailed embossing powder or something of that sort. Okay, so we have a little bit more depth there. Okay. And let's go for one more. Or two, I don't know, we'll see. How about putting this one about right here, see that? Okay. But yeah, some kind of dimensional embossing would be really interesting. I mean, it's supposed to represent something really close up, and I mean, if you do something like emboss foregrounds or something like that, you'll, in actuality, have something closer up to you because it's raised off the surface. Okay, so we have that. Hopefully you're able to see that in the... Try to get rid of some of this glare here. There we go. See that depth down there? The black and the brown. So see, you just have to use colors within your color scheme that you've done, okay? And those colors will, it'll make sense having it like that in terms of the depth. Okay, and how about one more over this way? This wouldn't be bad if I just stamped some kind of saying in there, quote or something like that. It would be kind of interesting. I mean, it's a really mellow looking scene, doing it like that. But see where that little variation comes into play too, in the background. Here we go. Let me try to get that foreground in there. Okay. I mean, this is a really fast scene, to come together. And like I said, you can do it in all kinds of different colors. Just, pick your favorite color scheme, and, the important thing there was just to give it a good amount of coverage using that first color. Alright, now, let's see. Let's go for this stamp here. It's called, this is the flying, I think it's just Geese. I forgot the name of it. Bend that a little bit. Get rid of that glare. Alright, now these geese can be stamped out in black or brown. If I do it in brown, they'll look a little bit farther back in the distance, and I'm kind of opting, I think I'm going to opt for that. I haven't used this rich cocoa much at all, because I'm doing a few little taps on there and there's like bubbles of ink built up on this. Let me try to get a good amount of ink on here. It's just, as I tap it in here, it's leaving bubbles there. There's so much ink. Okay, so sometimes if I have a really new pad, what I do is I kind of go like this. See, if I go like that, there's a ton of ink on here. Can you see that? It's all built up right there. It's too much because it's filling in the detail of the stamp. So sometimes if I have, a brand new pad like that, what I'll do is I can use the corner maybe like this. And then what I might do is I might kind of wipe like that a little bit. So I'm kind of wiping off some of the ink. Let me see if that gives me the impression I want. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going a little tap like that, and see, I'm kind of moving it a little bit, so it's kind of wiping off some of the ink off the surface. Alright. That's still a lot of ink. Oh well. Let's give it a try. As my beginning painting teacher in college used to say about our artwork when we were kind of undecided about doing something, she'd always say, well, it's not precious. And I think a lot of us were thinking, yes, it is. We spent too much time on this, you know. All right. Fairly light, but much back in the distance, right? Yeah, pretty cool. All right. So let's see here. Now we have a gold color scheme, right? Golden, I don't know, it's brown, but let's try some things on here. I can't use my white pen because the white pen represents kind of this reflective type of highlight, okay? But let's see what this yellow pen will do. It's probably the same color as that mustard seed a little bit. Let's see if we can get in here. This is a Uniball Signo gel pen. Okay, see that? Uniball Signo. And we'll just add a few little highlights on some of these branches. This Uniball Signo pen, I had a little trouble with. Let me try that other pen. I mentioned this in another video, this Jelly Roll Moonlight pen, 5 Dawn colors. But anyways, it's a gel ink. That seemed to stick better on, I don't know why that yellow Signo pen doesn't seem to stick as well, but okay, there we go, that's what I want. So I guess I'm just kind of adding this to some of these little stalks. See how that kind of makes it stand out a little bit more from the background? And I mean, this is a yellow light in the scene because, you know, the lightest thing in the scene is yellow, this area in here. So what we have are yellow highlights. So let's say if there was a little bit of dew or something like that on these branches, it would be reflecting that same color light. I mean, I could have left some white in here or something like that and used a white pen, but I didn't want to. But anyways, you can see these little dots on some of these branches. Don't do it everywhere, otherwise it'll look like kind of Christmas lights. But see that right back in there? Now, one of the subtle things I'm doing is because this is center lit in here, there's lighting coming from here, so on the left side of these branches, I'm adding these highlights. Even though these branches are really thin, for the most part I'm adding it on the left side. Okay? Now, when we get into the left side of the scene, I'll put those highlights on the right sides of these branches. And then, just in a very subtle way, what we're doing is we are reiterating the lighting scheme of the scene. And as thin as these little branches, little spindly branches are, you're kind of making them a little bit more dimensional. you know, saying that they're lit from one side over another. And this is just kind of a fun little textural element. These branches down below, I'm putting a few little highlights on the top sides of the branch, okay? So you have them kind of coming to life a little bit. So, two stamps, multiple impressions with one of them, in the form of the prickly branches. A few little, few colors laid in there, but as far as like a statement, as far as visual depth goes, I think there's as much going on, you know, or the same things that are going on in something like this as you know, some of the more complex compositions that you might work on. So if you want to do something really fast, and like I said, these things look great in other color schemes as well. You see those little highlights down here? You can see where the kind of the placement of them are. This is on the left side of the scene, so highlights are on the right sides. When you get to the branches underneath, I don't know, I just kind of put them on the top sides. I don't know, some they just travel down when it's like straight up, but when you start moving on the right side of the scene, you can see those little dots are kind of a little bit more targeted on the left side of the branches. Okay, kind of. I mean, it's really thin, but anyway. So just a fun, deep space statement, tonal statement, I guess you can say. And like I said, you can do it with all kinds of different color schemes and imagery too. I like these images right here, something kind of a little spindly, you know, because they don't cover up too much of what's going on in the background, okay? You know, they're light and airy, but within that space you can create a lot of depth by layering them in different values, retaining the black for the closest things to you. I mean, if things got really dark too, you can even go, you know, medium tone, darker tone, and if you get really dark down here, you can even take like a brilliance, like in this scene right here. If this got a little bit darker, let's say this darker area got up to this area, okay? So I can go medium tone for the background imagery, black in terms of the foreground, and then if this got really dark down here, one of the things you can also do is you can take like a brilliance or a I don't know what other types of pigment ink, like a metallic in here, like if you stamped it out in gold down here or something like that. That might look kind of interesting going with that kind of color scheme. Speaking of that, let's see, this is a Pilot G2 gel pen. These are just like some little golden highlights if you want to do something like that. Yeah. Let's see, let me put a few little twinkly stars in the sky. Alright, very subtle. See those stars up there, but see that when they capture, you know, when they are capturing some of the light, they're reflecting those stars a little bit more. which are kind of fun to do, right? It's those little things, you know, those little details like that can add that extra little visual, I don't know, stimuli to a scene. All right, just a quick scene with a 2 stamp. This thing keeps bending. This is a 10-point cardstock. If I had a 12-point cardstock, I would always go for that in the future. But I bought several cases of paper one time that were going from this company that was going out of business, but the 12-point wouldn't curl as much, which doesn't really matter because I usually mat these in the end, but just to save me the hassle of kind of flattening something out is good. 2 stamps, I don't know, maybe about 4 different colors in the background, a lot of depth, and the use of some little gel pens in here. I thought it looked fine without the gel pen though, but those gel pen highlights can be kind of fun, you know, and pulling this imagery apart from the background a little bit. It gives similar textures to background imagery, so it kind of separates them, but it unifies them in terms of a universal texture. Going with the same colors for the imagery as you did in the background color schemes will make that brown background branches make sense. So, like I said, you can do this with all kinds of different color schemes. And just do it in the same way. Start with your lighter tones, and then work in your medium tones and your darker tones for this surrounding area. If this was, say, in a blue color scheme, then go with like probably a medium blue, you know, in terms of your background imagery. And like I said, you can do it with pine trees, whatever, you know, palm trees, anything like that. Foliage of any sort looks really good in this. And you don't have to put in some kind of thing. Even a quote in here would have been really nice, you know, something kind of mellow and appropriate for the setting. So quick to do, and makes a full kind of statement in terms of having a full scene in terms of creating depth and whatnot. So anyways, I hope you enjoy the scene, and thanks for watching.